Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a new releases wrap up. There will be 5 books that I'll be talking about, one of which was a dystopian story, which I know technically isn't fantasy, but I know a lot of you who are fantasy fans do like to occasionally hop into sci-fi or dystopian stories, so I thought I would mention it here. It's also obviously a new release. And then I also have a book that I did not complete. It was a DNF. I read through a decent amount of it though, and I thought the premise was really interesting, so I at least wanted to put it on your radar if you haven't seen all that much about it, give you a little heads up as to what it's about, because you might end up having more luck than I did with it. But regardless, the 5 books that I'll be talking about, I'll have timestamps in case you want to skip ahead. We'll be talking about The Lost Metal very briefly, because I did do an in-depth review for that one, Duel with the Vampire Lord, Poster Girl, One Dark Window, and then Strike the Zither. I'm going to start with the DNF, which was One Dark Window. The premise for this one was really fascinating, really interesting, really unique. You have this society that there is this almost like a curse placed on everyone in this one area as a result of this magic that has been broken apart. And what happens is occasionally a young person, usually a child, will end up showing signs of magic, and when that happens, they have to be dealt with. And as to what exactly that means, those are kind of some details that you discover as you're reading through it. Our main character is someone who should have been found out to have had magic because she did develop some, but her family, they have a lot of influence in their society, and they sort of hid her away for a while to ensure that people did not realize that she had this magic. So she came out of it on the other side. Now she's trying to get back into society, and she has this interesting being that sort of talks to her and that is in her head. And at times, whenever she finds herself in danger, she can allow this being to give her additional strength. But she continuously wonders how dangerous it is to allow this being to do this. Will there be a point where this being will take over her body completely? She also wants to hide this from other people, and she doesn't know that whatever telltale sign there might be that she has magic, she's afraid that it's going to come out at some point surrounded by people, but she doesn't even know what that telltale sign might be. So she's very on edge, she's very nervous, and it definitely created a level of suspense. The magic itself has to do with these cards, and there's a different magical ability associated with different cards. I thought that was all really fascinating. The story has this sort of darkness to it, to its atmosphere, and to, in general, the tone to some degree, but it also leaned a little young and a little melodramatic, and it was especially true of the dialogue between the characters. Pretty quickly, as soon as our character comes in contact with this one man in the story, I was like, oh, okay, there's going to be a romance here, which I'm not opposed to, but it felt like it was developing really quickly, and the interactions between them I wasn't the biggest fan of. I actually saved I took a picture of one of the pages because I thought that this would be a good indication as to what I meant when I say it was a little melodramatic. So to set up this scene, our main character is talking about this guy that is really into her and she's not into him, and she kind of just is trying to be polite but also a little standoffish with this guy. And then the handsome love interest man is sort of seeing this happen, and so they're having a conversation about it. And the guy, whose name is Raven, which I'm like, I mean, of course his name is Raven. So the guy Raven says, it's the nice ones you should look out for, because she was saying the guy, she's like, well, I mean, he's nice. So he says, it's the nice ones you should look out for. And then it says, I glanced up at him. What about you, Captain? Are you too nice for your own good? And then this is when I was like, I think I gotta DNF this, because this is just not... I'll just read it to you. It says, he watched me, something I could not read, flashing in his gray eyes. No, Miss Spindle, he said, I'm not nice at all. And I'm all for a good amount of angst in a story. Every now and then I'm like, I want a lot of angst. The angstier, the better. Every now I'm in the mood for that. But I think what didn't work for me with this particular story is the juxtaposition of this kind of darker magic and this really intense amount of stakes that our character is facing, that it felt like it was not meshing with this sort of really angsty, young, dramatic type of way of talking to each other. And I guess I just wanted them to act a little bit more mature and a little less mysterious man. And so it didn't end up working for me, but the premise was so cool. And the magic seemed really interesting. And that angst is not an objectively bad thing. It just, I couldn't really take it seriously. So it ended up being a DNF for me, but hopefully some of you will pick it up and really enjoy it. Next up, I'll very briefly mention The Lost Metal. I did do a whole review for this one. I'll have it linked down below. It is non-spoiler, regardless of whether you have read through all of Era 2 to this point or not, so you don't have to worry about spoilers. But regardless, I did enjoy this as a series conclusion. I liked the resolution for all of the characters and their arcs. I, just like everybody else, was very excited to see how this book would relate to the greater Cosmere, since Sanderson's Cosmere books are all part of this shared universe. And so I was really excited to see certain things pop up, and I enjoyed those elements quite a bit. I found that the pacing was my favorite aspect of the story, because once it hit a certain point, it definitely was nonstop until the end. I thought Sanderson utilized the different perspectives really well, so that I was always intrigued about each person's perspective. One thing that has been true of all of the Era 2 books, not just The Lost Metal, is that Sanderson's tone in this series compared to his other Cosmere works is definitely a lot sillier. And humor is so subjective. I think when it comes to the more lighthearted, fun, adventurous feel, Warbreaker does it in a way that I really like. But with Era 2, I do think that it leans into the comic relief a little bit more than I care for, to a point where some of the really emotional moments were lessened. Their impact was lessened for me because we lean so into the silly factor. It's a hard thing to balance, and it is going to be so different from person to person. So while I really liked the conclusion to this series, while I really liked all the setup that we're essentially getting for other Cosmere works, I did find that it is still not my favorite in the Cosmere as a result of that tonal shift that we have compared to the other works. Next up would be the dystopian story, and that would be Poster Girl. This is one where all the individual ingredients were great. When I talk about it, it seems like something I should have loved, because so many of the elements to the society are things that I think are really interesting to explore, especially in this dystopian type of setting. But the way everything came together, sadly, the end result was not something that I ultimately really loved. I kind of kept feeling like I was right on the edge of liking it, and I just couldn't quite get over that bump. And so it wasn't that I disliked it, but I also didn't love it, and I kind of just felt somewhat in the middle. And the setup for the story is that we are looking at this society that previously everybody, their standing in society, and then you can almost argue their wealth and their status, was associated with how good of a citizen they were. They had these things put inside their minds when they were babies, and then these things have kind of shaped around and grown with their brains, and you can see it in a person's eye. Whenever a person has an opportunity to do something good, if they follow through on that opportunity, they are awarded something, and then if they do bad things, that award is taken away from them. This is something I have seen utilized in dystopian stories before as kind of a world-building detail. It was in Marie Lu's Legend series, I believe in the 3rd book, and I remember thinking, oh, that's interesting, and it was something as simple as a person picking up a piece of trash from the ground and throwing it away, and they'd be rewarded for that. And obviously, if you do something bad, taken away. So I'm like, okay, I've kind of seen this before. It's not the most original thing, but let's see how the author explores it. Maybe they're going to do some really interesting things, some commentary on where's the line as far as what we punish, where's the line for surveillance, things like that. Because originally in this, you're seeing this used as a means of keeping society more polite and to reduce crime. But then it gets to a point where if you even whistle in public, then you're punished for that. You're penalized for the simplest of things. And I'm like, okay, so that's really interesting. And the idea is that that's how society used to be, and our main character was somebody who loved this. She loved having this thing that kind of constantly encouraged her to fit a certain mold and to do the right thing and be this perfect citizen. And she ended up posing for this propaganda poster, and she became known as this poster girl. She was very recognizable. eventually the society collapsed. And that's where we're starting the book, is our main character's entire family, something happened to them because they were notable figures in society. And now her and a lot of other individuals whose family members or they themselves were notable members of society are kind of confined to this one area. It's not quite a prison, but it might as well be. It's this certain area of the city where they kind of have to fend for themselves. Nobody really protects them from crime. It's kind of like, go ahead and reap the rewards of the society that you endorsed in a way. And all this, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so cool. Our main character has the opportunity to gain her freedom from this place if she helps the new society find a missing child. And some of the ways that the dystopian setting talked about missing children and having a limit on how many children a family could have and all these things, I'm like, okay, this is really interesting. And I was really liking all this. And our main character for a lot of the story seems like she doesn't have a ton of personality, which I thought was very fitting, given that she was so accustomed to kind of being told what to do for so long that she hasn't really learned to think for herself. So I'm like, okay, it makes sense that I'm not going to connect with her for a long time. Maybe we're going to see some character growth throughout the story, which I think is true and that you do see that. But it just never dove as deep into any of those things I've mentioned as I wanted. It ended up always feeling like they were background details, and I never quite got as much as I was hoping for. So even though I thought all the ideas were really cool, I thought the world building was really interesting, I just didn't find anything had as much depth as I wanted. Still would recommend, still would say check it out. It's really short too, so you can fly through this. And there are some interesting reveals and some twists and turns. So hopefully if you pick it up, you'll like it a little bit more than me. I want to reiterate that I didn't dislike it. I just had hoped for a little more. Completely switching gears, next up we have Duel with the Vampire Lord. This is what the naked hardback looks like, so I'm just going to hold this up. This is within a series of standalones, which I know is a little bit of an oxymoron, but this would be the third book in this series of standalones called Married to Magic. And all of the books in this series take place within the same world, but they are all standing on their own. And the first one has to do with somebody who is sort of forced marriage to an elf. It's a human who's marrying an elf. And then the second one, you see a character who is butting heads with a fae. As you can guess by the name of this one, we're looking at the vampires that are within this world. And these are fantasy romance. They're not the steamiest of romance stories. You're not going to get tons and tons of detail. So if you're somebody who maybe doesn't want all the detail, but you still want to read a love story that has a little bit of angst to it, then I would say maybe give this series a try. And you don't have to read them in order. You're completely good because they're all standalones. You can read whichever one you want. This one, to me, I think had the strongest world building, the biggest kind of mystery to what happened between humans and the vampires. Why do they hate each other so much? And it turns out that there's something going on with the vampires that has led them to hate the humans, even though the humans think, well, they're the predators, they're feeding off of us. Why would they hate us? Why are they treating us like we're the problem? And so you're like, why are they treating them like they're the problem? And you kind of want to learn more. It definitely has enemies to lovers. And it's funny because once the characters start to interact with each other and talk to each other, they really talk to each other most of the time pretty reasonably. And they seem to very quickly be like, well, I want to make sure that I'm not overstepping, and I want to make sure that I'm hearing what you have to say. And they're really understanding. And I'm like, this is unusual. I'm not used to this in fantasy romance. Usually there's always some big, well, sometimes there's like not misunderstandings, but they'll have arguments. But they don't have that constant, really intense tension. But I almost would say it leans into where they're really understanding sometimes of each other almost like too soon. And so it ends up feeling not quite like insta-love, but close to insta-love. Anyway, I still enjoyed it. I still really liked seeing her take on the vampires of this world. But ultimately, they're kind of fantasy light at the same time, even though they have plenty of fantastical elements. It just doesn't feel like it's demanding where I have to figure out and piece together all these world building details. It's all pretty easy to get into. Last for today, we have Strike the Zither. This is one that I was enjoying the beginning of it, but I wasn't falling in love with it. I kind of kept feeling like, is this what we're going to be doing for the entirety of the book. We follow this girl who is a strategist, and there are a lot of warring factions, we'll call them, a lot of people that are vying for power. And this particular main character, she is a strategist for somebody who she really appreciates their ideals. She appreciates their character and who they are and what they represent. And even though they are the underdog, she ultimately feels that even though she wants to elevate herself and she has her own somewhat selfish motivations, she wants to stand behind somebody that she feels proud to be the strategist for. That does result in her having her work cut out for her because the other individuals have stronger militaries or they have a lot more that gives them advantages. The book has different stanzas, which are basically different parts, and all of part 1 is just seeing our main character in her element, just seeing her be a strategist, which I'm generally really for some scheming and some political maneuverings, but I also was kind of wondering when things were going to feel like they were starting. There was a lot of, okay, I'm going to try to convince this person that I actually want to betray who I'm following, and then I'm going to lead them and be a strategist for them, and I have to hope that this previous person actually believes that I'm not doing that. And so it was a lot of back and forth, and I was enjoying it, but I kind of kept feeling like it seems like there's something that I almost want to say it felt like something was missing. And I would encourage that if you're feeling similarly to wait until stanza 2. And just like with Descendant of the Crane, who this author also wrote that book, just like with that book, I was feeling that way for a while with that one too. And then I got to a certain point where I'm like, oh, this is not what I was expecting. And it takes a turn, and the turn it's a good enough, sort of a moment that alone made me want to keep reading. And then it was a little bit sort of a dangerous move because you might lose some people in the beginning. But then also when you do have this shift, maybe some people won't like the shift, but I really liked the shift and I was kind of caught off guard. I appreciated how bold this shift was. And then also I was sort of finding myself sad and seeing the character having to grow in a way where she sort of is forced to look at things differently, to change a little bit. I think it's a unique story, and I also think that this author's writing is very good as far as the way she's able to describe things, the way she's able to set a scene. I really like the crafting of the sentences, the word choice. I just think there's something about her writing that flows. Every now and then, I kind of find myself wishing that she was writing adult, because some of the interactions between the characters can feel a little youthful, and the writing's so rich, and so it almost feels like it's a hint of a clash when the characters are being sassy with each other or something. So I wish that sometimes it was adult so that the characters would have these very mature personalities, I suppose. To me, this almost ended up coming across a tiny bit like a young adult version and a much, much shorter version of Grace of Kings. Just a little bit. It's not a direct comparison. I wouldn't say, oh my gosh, absolutely, if you like one, you'll like the other. But I think it's easier to get into similar political military type of fantasy. Enjoyed it. Excited for the sequel. I really like this author. I hope more people pick this up. That's it for some recent new fantasy and then also a dystopian story. If you've read any of these, let me know your thoughts on them. And if you're planning on picking any of these up, let me know which one you're wanting to read. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.